What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be going over some cards, at least from the modern format, that are in the potential chopping block from the format in the August 7th, 2023 yearly banned and restricted announcement that is going to take place before we get previews for the Wilds of Eldraine, which basically my basis for these cards being here is, from the recent Pro Tour that we had, which if you haven't checked out any of my preview stuff and kind of like my wrap up stuff with the event being done, after you're done watching this video, please consider hopping over there and checking those out because I would like to think that I did a pretty good job with some predictions and, correctly identifying kind of like what the format wants to do going forward, or at least for that event. If things stay the same. Of course, before we get too deep into the list and everything and talk about the elephant in the room, or I guess the ring in the room, I would appreciate it if you're not already subscribed to my channel, if you would consider subscribing, ring notification bell so you know when videos get posted, and of course liking the video. It helps with like the algorithm and things like that. On top of that, if you go into the description of this video, I have two links. I have one going to the Discord server that I run, so if you want to join over there, please feel free to do so. I encourage it highly. And I also have my Twitch channel linked in there as well, so you get notified when I go live if you follow it, and then go over and follow me. So these cards, I picked three in particular because they have to do with probably the two best performing decks, or the one deck that was the highest played in the field at the Pro Tour, which is the Rakdos Evoke deck. And then Mono Green Tron, surprisingly coming out of nowhere, where I think Tron was solidly like a tier 1.5 to tier 2 deck, ended up taking over the top three spots, the three highest seeds in the top eight, and then ended up putting two players in the same team into top eight, and of course, unfortunately for it, being knocked out in the finals altogether to the eventual winner slash most played deck in the format, Rakdos Folk. But there is three cards that I think have the potential to kind of end up being too good for modern and kind of moving away from, and just in my personal opinion. And I think the most likely one is going to be some kind of change to the One Ring. Now, the One Ring, for those not familiar with it, I actually did go into depth in a video about why the One Ring is so good. So essentially, it's a 4-mana artifact. It's indestructible. It's legendary, which is important. When the ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life for each burden counter on the ring, and you can tap it to put a burden counter on it and draw a number of cards equal to the number of burden counters on the One Ring. So the idea is that you're essentially like activating it, and you're getting to draw an increasing amount of cards, and then in turn on your next upkeep you are then taking the damage and things like that, which is really cool, and definitely is a way to like punish people, because you do get to a point where it's like, oh, I can't really draw any more cards, and then the ring is still dealing you damage. However, what players quickly picked up on is that if your deck is playing like 4 copies of the ring, you activate it 3, 4 times, you end up drawing 10 cards, you take like 6 damage, but then you're able just to cast another ring, get protection from everything, which is beneficial for you, because if your opponent is able to swing for lethal, that obviously stops them from doing so. They don't get any benefit from attacking, so on. And of course, you're going to draw 3 extra cards with this, so it's like a virtual time walk in a way, and an ancestral. And all you do is essentially pay 4 mana and a life, and from there, like, it just kind of snowballs out of control. We saw at the Pro Tour, where probably one of the best decks, and probably is the best deck to play the One Ring in, is Tron, for the fact that it can play 4 copies in the main deck, and with all of its different cyclers and playing Ancient Stirrings, it will be able to find it very, very quickly. And in the case of like Christian Calcano, playing 3 in the main, 1 on the side, with 4 Karn, the Great Creator, in the main deck, to give him a virtual like 7 copies of the One Ring. And I think that's kind of where the problem of the One Ring lies, is the fact that this should be something that you play, and you get like the benefit of drawing so many cards, but then you also have that drawback of it dealing damage. The fact that you're able to play multiple copies of the One Ring, and once your ring gets too high of like a cost to be paid, you can just play another one and you get a benefit from playing it as getting protection from everything until your next turn. On top of now you're not taking damage from that ring, and you've already drawn 6 to 10 cards, roughly for 6 life, which the going rate is usually like a 1 life per card, and even that's like too good, and the One Ring gives you the potential for so much more than that, especially since of drawing that many cards, you are very likely to find another ring. And again, in the case of like Tron, if you just draw another Karn, you're able to have access to another ring from your sideboard if you have not already cast it to reset that ring, and of course just again get that benefit of just getting to not take damage anymore, and then continue to draw cards once you've kind of stabilized in that manner. So I could see the One Ring doing something that has never been done in Modern and being restricted. And while it seems like a good idea because it forces decks that want to play the One Ring that you have to have effects like Teferi Time Raveler to bounce it to reset it that way, or just any effect to return it from the battlefield to your hand, or any way to just exile it because the ring is indestructible. I am worried that that makes Tron too good, as then it makes it the only deck that has any access to the One Ring with some consistency. Being able to just play one on the sideboard, play 4 Karn. It's like they're playing 4 rings when everyone else has to play with one. If you're not playing like Karn the Great Creator or something like that. So unfortunately, I think the ring, if it ends up on the list, it has to be banned. While I think it would actually be like a flavor win, plus kind of fitting to only play like one copy. If I guess if they could somehow make it to where you can only play one copy of the ring and it has to be in your main board, if you want to play it, or you can't play Karn, whatever. That's just a lot of like stipulations to put on a card like this to have it not only show up in one deck or not at all. So I think if in that case, if there's any hinting that the One Ring needs to go, then it just needs to go, and kind of the ramifications that could lead towards a card like Orcish Bowmaster seeing less play in the format, considering it was like a counter to the One Ring, for the fact that if your opponent wanted to keep activating it, you were going to be able to keep picking things. If they didn't have protection, then that was just going to be direct damage to their face, on top of just making a token that ends up being bigger than a lot of the creatures that those decks play. And the only one that really could do anything about it would have been like Tron, just because it has access to virtually like 14 other cards in its sideboard that could deal with like a giant orcish army token. So while the ring is a lot of fun, it was definitely a lot of fun playing it in the 4 color Omnath deck. It probably is the most likely card to go. Uh, with all that being said, which is unfortunate because it is fun, and I will continue to say that forever. Uh, kind of hoping it doesn't see the ban, but if it does, I'm also not super hurt in either way because it'll probably be for the better of the format. So that's the One Ring. The next card I think is very likely, and it kind of feels bad, but of course I'll explain here in a second, is Grief. Now, Grief is one of 2 evoke elementals in the Rakdos scam deck or Rakdos evoke deck, and this one is especially bad. Uh, if you are on the play, your opponent ends up keeping like 7 cards, or ends up having to mulligan and goes down to 6, and you play a land, you grief exiling a black card, whatever, and then feign death it, you essentially like 2 for 2 your opponent, where you have a 4/3 menace in play. You get to take your opponent's 2 best cards, or like their removal spell, and like their 1 or 2 drop, and their hand is just decimated. They can't just play one creature to like chump block the grief. They have to play 2 of them. Or in the case if you like evoke a fury and then feign death it, it's not nearly as impactful in turn 1 because you're probably not getting anything with it, and your opponent's just able to like play a creature and chump block it, eventually play enough lands to where they can actually remove the fury or what have you. Grief ends up being one of the best ones, simply for that fact of it stops your opponent's early plays and stops them from really getting to do anything relevant for a lot of the game. And sometimes this grief can just deal the full 20 points of damage to your opponent. Other times it ends up dealing like 12 or 16, and from that point, the Rakdos Evoke deck plays like a Rakdos mid-range deck and has cards like Dothy Voidwalker, which can't be blocked essentially except by other like Dothy Voidwalkers with the ability Shadow, because there's no other creatures that have Shadow that could actually block the Voidwalker except for itself. You of course you have like Ragavans and stuff to kind of pair with Grief to put added pressure on your opponent. And some versions the you're playing Fable of the Mirror Breaker, to where you can kind of double up on like these griefs, and of course making a 2/2, getting to get rid of extra lands, so then you can end up hopefully drawing some spells, getting rid of some dead spells, and getting to kind of go from there. Uh, Grief is easily the best card when you get to do the scam thing. And on top of that, like just getting to like play a Voidwalker and then Grief without having the Feign Death to bring it back, it just creates like a lot of synergy to where like you can play a Voidwalker on two, take your opponent's best card, and then like now next turn Dothy has a card that you want to play with it that could just theoretically end the game. Uh, what I don't want to see Grief get banned because I think the effect is good. It's just the fact that there's ways to double up on it. Of course, I would like to see a change to like the evoke, to where essentially it it comes into play and it immediately gets sacrificed if evoke was paid for it. Like it's no longer a trigger that goes on the stack. It's just something that happens, and then if you get like a benefit from a creature dying, you would get that trigger, because it would like enter and then immediately like sacrifice itself or what have you. Uh, that probably won't happen. I could see just evoke kind of like staying the way that it is, but like grief getting the ban hammer strictly for the fact that Fury on turn one isn't nearly as devastating as a grief on turn one, just because even a fury on turn one, like, yeah, it ends the game in far fewer hits than a grief. It's just a lot easier to deal with when you have those extra resources on top of like, even if you don't have like a removal spell, you're able to play like a creature and kind of block and eventually just kind of deal with the grief or with the Fury. That said, when you have cards like Feign Death in your deck, it makes even like removing these cards like miserable. So, and on top of that, you're essentially two for oneing yourself, because your opponent is going to feign death their grief after you lightning bolt it, and then they're going to take your next best card out of your hand and still have a grief in play, and it's it's just dumb. The fact that like maybe like Feign Death and like those like 1 mana like bring the thing back could probably get banned, and this card would be okay. Uh, I definitely think Grief is just one that has to go if they're not willing to ban those kinds of cards. So that's Grief. The last one kind of has to do with the ring. It's going to be Karn the Great Creator. So Karn the Great Creator was a card that was able to be played in Tron, I believe in Mythic Championship 4, and then just straight up like wasn't played. And then after that, we had Karn plus Lattice Lock, where you turn all your opponent's permanents and artifacts. Karn didn't allow them to activate them. Essentially, all they could do was attack with like the creatures that they had in play, and they couldn't even like force a vigor it, because it turned all of your opponent's cards colorless as well, or turned all cards into colorless artifacts and stuff. So you couldn't even, free cast spells by pitching like green cards and stuff, because the cards had no colors. From there, obviously, Lattice gets banned, so people can continue to play with Karn the Great Creator. And I think as long as like in conjunction with like the One Ring and all these powerful artifacts that keep getting printed, it seems with like subsequent sets, the Karn the Great Creator becomes an even more valuable tool in like the decks that it's in, mainly Tron, but there are some other decks that, can get away with playing like a Karn the Great Creator to kind of have access to these silver bullets in the sideboard. And while it's not necessarily a bad thing to like kind of shore up matchups, it does kind of get redundant and quite frankly pretty stupid that you are building around like this card in a way. You don't have any like sideboard cards because you just have a complete access to your 75 cards, from game one, where like Rakdos and stuff like that, they only have access to their 60. And I know Rakdos is like doing something unfair, and like to a point, Tron is also doing something that's pretty unfair. The fact that this card in particular just gives you so many options on top of the fact that like Tron itself in particular has like a ton of haymakers in the main deck, and Karn just uh, is a haymaker itself on top of just getting whatever card you need in the situation you need, that your opponent is very likely to not be able to deal with and is going to cause them to lose the game, all because you resolved a 4 mana planeswalker in a deck that makes 7 mana on turn 3. And in cases like a lot of decks too that are able to play Karn and then just able to protect it, they go and get their thing and then lock you out of the game, and then the next activation just gets liquid metal coating and they start stone raining you every turn, and that's not fun. Karn the Great Creator makes games fun for the person playing it, not so much for the person playing against it. And I think if they don't want to ban the One Ring, I think banning Karn the Great Creator is kind of like a step forward. Uh, and then maybe still eventually leads to banning of the ring because it also stops people from being able to activate their ring. But I think it's also kind of cheap in a way to have something that gets you extra copies, like allows you to play extra copies of the One Ring in a way, and then stops your opponent from activating their ring, but you get your ring, and then they have to figure out a way to deal with like your Karn, which being a Planeswalker, some of the other decks that get to play on Holy Heat and like Fury and stuff don't really have a problem with it, but things like Yawgmoth, where you really only have like some of your aggressive creatures like in Geist and Grist as ways to like get rid of it. It just isn't a lot of fun. Karn is a very polarizing card, and I think I'd be fine with seeing it go and just have like those Tron decks play a different like Haymaker and stuff in that spot, rather than playing this and having access to 15 other Haymakers that are all situation dependent. I feel like there should definitely be that deck building challenge of like, okay, do I want a Sundering Titan in my Mayboard or do I want a Cityscape Leveler? Not, well, I'll just put them in the sideboard and have access to both. And that is my kind of evaluation and I guess predictions in a way, like cards that I would not be surprised that are being considered for the ban and restrict announcement. I am recording this before, we have like any of the challenges or any of the events like post Pro Tour, which I would expect to see a lot of like the top decks. I would expect to see, a lot of Tron and like Rakdos and things like that, just simply for the fact that they were the most played decks. They both made it to the finals, and especially in the case of like the team handshake version, definitely more interactive against decks like Rakdos. So definitely seeing like Karn the Great Creator or the Ring kind of get the ban hammer, but I think that if the Ring goes, then something else has to go with it, which I think would be something like Grief, or maybe just banning a lot of the 1 mana like Feign Death cards to kind of balance it out. So let me know in the comments down below if you have if there's a card or cards that you think will be banned in the modern format. There's also the possibility of unbannings as well. They haven't done it in a while, but that would be something that I would like to see personally, for the fact that we haven't seen it in a while. Most of the cards that they've unbanned, have seen play initially, but Stoneforge Mystic is the only one that sees consistent play in like a tier like 1.5 like modern deck. So that's gonna do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a like on the video. Ring notification bell so you know when videos get posted. Travel down in the description. Follow those links. Join the Discord server. Follow me on Twitch. Really appreciate it. I appreciate all the support on the content. That's gonna do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you all in the next one.